So apparently, I'm on the air, and we are going to be talking about yesterday's. Um, I don't want to call it a protest because there were protesters, but the event was actually meant to be would be called a rally or a free speech rally. It wasn't treated like this by a number of groups. So now I call these other groups being anti-free speech advocates because of their actions, not because of what they stand for, or the reasons they were doing it, but because of their actual actions in terms of trying to suppress the speech of other people. It's very hard to understand why you would go out of your way to suppress the speech of other people. So to be clear who these groups were, and you can look them up, Antifa, which is supposed to be an anti-fascist group. So they take what a lot of people characterize them as these days as taking fascist tactics in terms of suppressing other people's speech. Very authoritarian. That was one group, not to be confused with the others. And so in the middle, we have a primarily right-leaning free speech group, a lot of Trump supporters, but there's a huge mix of people in the middle of what was supposed to be the free speech rally, and there was no need for people to protest this particular rally. It had nothing to do with anything that had happened in Portland the day before. There was of course, if you're not aware, there was a killing. A couple of people were killed on the train. Anyways, I'll let you look into that. I'll link. I don't really have anything constructive to say about that particular. I haven't really investigated that event, but I knew it was one of the reasons why the mayor wanted to suppress this particular event. But this event and that have nothing to do with each other. They shouldn't be suppressed. And rightfully, the Fed says, no, this is federal land. It's going to take place. It took place, and it was peaceful. There were a couple events that were kind of interesting, but they were really non-events. They had nothing to do with the actual rally, free speech rally. Now, were there antagonists? I have no idea the actual dynamics outside of the rally. I did go outside to the different camps, and so to the north was Antifa. To the west was Black Lives Matter, and to the east was a pro-union group. And there was there was a parking garage to the south. So that's kind of what you have around you. The protesters outnumbered the rally supporters by a large margin. Very important to suppress this group of people. Now, if you actually go online and listen to what they were saying, it's non-controversial. When I talk to people, why are you protesting them? This is when I went over to the Antifa side. There were a couple of women that were willing to talk to me that didn't have masks on. And they kind of tried to explain to me the reasoning behind the mask and stuff. And I was, well, but do you understand what it looks like? It's what I was trying to let them understand why there was a bit of animosity. When you come around with mask on, you're taking away your accountability. You do not want to be held accountable for your actions. She said, well, it's about solidarity. And I said, fine. I mean, if that's the way you look at it, you're welcome to that perspective. But from everyone else that isn't wearing a mask, they're holding signs and they're willing to stand behind the speech that they're trying to make. And all you're trying to do is suppress their right to speech. That's my Antifa argument there. And so their argument towards a free speech rally was they're doing they're anti-gay. Well, and when I said, well, they're not, she said, well, they just tell you that because they're just trying to recruit you. Well, okay, that's an interesting conspiracy theory, and that can go both ways. Antifa could just be saying they're anti-fascist, but really they're fascist. So, I mean, where does that argument get you? So taking people at what their values are, I think was something that we need to take away. And really the values are not that far apart. And that's the one takeaway I think everyone should get, is when you actually get down to what the disagreements are, it's either misinformation, it's just not true, or it's so minor that you could come to a reasonable agreement. And I took some of the arguments from Antifa, I took some of the arguments from Black Lives Matter, and I took some of the arguments from unions, and I posed some of the questions to the free speech group in the middle, just to see what kind of reactions I got. And as expected, it was very something that could be agreed on. It's something you could have a reasonable conversation about. Whether it was about immigration, whether it was about racial relations, whether it was about unions, all of these things were something you could come to some sort of reasonable agreement on. There wasn't, from a negotiation perspective, you could see that there were alignments. Everyone's an American. And when you push them on the issue of free speech, they say, of course you have the right to free speech. And we have a right to have a free speech. Yes, but why is it so important to you to suppress the free speech rally? Why do you need to suppress this particular speech? What are you demonstrating? Because what you're doing by standing there is you're demonstrating against free speech. Because that was the primary reason that people gathered in the middle into the park. So anyways, I thought that was very interesting, that it's really hard for people to see that there's really not that much disagreement. What are you trying to accomplish? And the narrative, and this is really the frustration about this kind of narrative, is that we need there to be conflict. News media wants conflict. If you go and read about this event, you will hear about all of the conflict, but the conflict is based on virtually nothing. It's a thirst, a need for conflict. That's what brings people out. It's a belief they want something to fight against. So they want to believe they're racist, fascists, because it gives them a reason to fight. It's a lot harder to actually say, okay, this is what we disagree with. How are we going to move forward? And it's a lot more mundane. So what kind of policies should we have? How are these policies hurting? How are these policies helping? And actually talk about the numbers involved in terms of who it benefits, who it doesn't benefit, why it doesn't benefit. When you have those conversations, they're a lot more nuanced, and you realize they're not progressing because we're not talking about them. We haven't actually got to the point that we say, oh, okay, we disagree about a few things. Let's work out those disagreements. We're probably more in alignment than many people realize in terms of ideology. I mean, the American culture is more homogeneous than we'd like to think. I mean, our values are pretty standard. And when people want to divide you, and this is sort of a criticism of all kinds of media, whether you're YouTube, whether you're mainstream, a writer, you want a conflict narrative, because conflict narratives sell your product. And we want controversy, because controversy is a part of, those are the things we need to worry about. The danger, what's dangerous. We can't overemphasize how, if it bleeds, it leads, our instinctive mentality. A lot of people have been pointing out in this for decades. We've known this tendency for news media to focus just on the bad news, but it's us. We're the ones that crave the bad news. We're the ones that crave the conflict. So it's something we need to change in ourselves, and it's something we need to recognize. There's probably, and the only thing I would say is there's probably less conflict in the world than you see. This certainly was not the divisiveness. There isn't rampant racism that people want you to believe there is. It isn't. And the racism, unfortunately, is in many cases reversed. In terms of the people that are claiming others to be racist are actually more likely to be the racist than the people that are being labeled with the term racist. So that's what I mean by reversed. So the person calling you a racist is probably more of a racist than you are a racist. So I wouldn't be too concerned if someone calls you a racist. In fact, at this point in time, I think it would be a very good determiner that you're not a racist and that you're just simply not willing to toe a specific narrative, an ideology. You're willing to listen to both sides. You're not willing to listen to just one side. And this is it can go both ways, and it can flip on a dime. Because when I said, well, there's some, and of course this is all on my live stream, and it's deep in there, and maybe I'll break out some of these conversations, but this lack of wanting to have conversations, I think, is something that needs to change if you really want to make progress. If people don't want to make progress, they can continue the conflict narrative. There isn't really a lot of conflict here, and that's the thing that you come to realize when you actually talk to people on an individual basis. You realize there really isn't a huge gulf here. There's an ideology that we want a gulf to exist because that gives us a reason, it gives us the emotion to move forward. So we have something to react to. So they have to create a negative narrative in order to have a reaction formation. And that's what we're seeing. And with YouTube, with this ability to give all this attention to this, to any event, we can create all these crazy narratives. But if we have multiple angles on the same event and we kind of dilute it down and realize this really wasn't that big of a deal, there was some kind of like people just gathering together to be a part of a community. I mean, there is that attraction. It's and realize there's something there too. I was attracted to the event because I knew there would be things going on, but my primary function for me was conversation and support of free speech. There's a lot of things said in the rally. I was like, I don't agree with that. You're not speaking to me. You're speaking to other people. And seeing their reaction just let me understand, okay, this is, some people react very strongly to that. And I should be more specific, but unfortunately, being me, I'm not being very specific about things. But in general, though, there were things I would have to agree with in terms of messaging. You have to stop being negative to people and listen. You have to actually sit down and listen to them and don't reject what they have to say. Agree with the things you can agree with and be very specific about the things you don't agree with, are the consequences of things that won't happen. So I did that. And I'm, people are generally very reasonable when you get to them one-on-one. Groups, and it's really funny, this anti-conversation message. We won't talk to you type of thing. Now, to be fair to every side had, I get something from someone. But like the unions were just like, I was like, we won't even talk to you. You're just wrong. They don't even know what they're arguing against. You're just wrong. I mean, maybe they're a particular policy of Trump's. That's fine. A union busting policy of some kind, understood. But to actually, when someone asks you a direct question, you don't want to articulate your grievances. That's kind of scary to me. It's kind of like, well, you're just wrong. If you're on that side of the fence, you're wrong. Conversation is far more important than the ideologies you want to support. Historically, I think people have used these bullying tactics to great effect, and they're perfecting the bullying tactic. So, but I think that's going to come back to haunt them as they realize less and less people will respond to bullying tactics, and we learn how to counter bullying tactics with non-bully tactics. And I think there are ways of doing that. Getting people on a one-on-one definitely is useful. And then continue the conversation past the point. Don't expect them to believe everything you tell them. Now, the one thing that I was a surprise that someone didn't know about, but he actually was Adam came over and we talked a bit about different things. And I mentioned the bike lock attacker, and he wasn't aware of it. And he said, that's too crazy. I can't believe it. And I said, you definitely need to look it up because it is crazy. It's very crazy. That's actual violence. And so we should look up to see when he has his day in court. But yeah, so there are some crazy things that people do in the name of maybe your group. No one would want to identify with that person. But they're using your labels, which is one reason we should stay away from a lot of labels, because someone's going to use your label to make you look bad. We should treat people as individuals. But yeah, I think this group think is something I would encourage everyone to really step back from and really try to listen to anyone that appears to have an opposing view to you. There was an interesting event. I was on the Antifa side and walking around, and one guy says, "Oh, see, there's a KKK flag." And I was like, well, I'll go ask him. And I couldn't remember what it was, but it's Kyrgyzstan. It's a joke. It's a meme from Fortran does this sort of meme generation thing, and Pepe has become their pet meme. It's just there to antagonize. If you don't look into an issue, if you don't ask questions, you won't know actually what's going on. And people will willingly tell you, but the point is they're putting it in your face. It says, you can't know what we're about simply by looking at our cover. Ironically, Antifa has the same sort of philosophy with their black garb, right? You can't know us, but yet if I ask you who you are, you won't tell me. I'm a part of the group. Okay, but you go to Kyrgyzstan, which I don't think Kyrgyzstan actually exists. I'm pretty sure it does not. No, I'm sure it doesn't. And they will tell you their story, but you have to ask. And that's the point of that particular meme, is it's like, you can't know, you can't, and if you assume, then you're going to be wrong. Because that is the whole idea of the meme. You have to have a conversation in order to understand the difference. So anyways, that is my recap of Portland. I might do some more, might like take out the interview I had with Tim Pool for what it's worth. It's in the first part of the live stream yesterday, so it's not hard to find. But anyways, I just want to do a quick digest of what happened for what it's worth. I'm going to cut it short. Anyways, have a good day.